The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, it is once again a privilege to speak on behalf of and for the exceptional and wonderful people of the East Grand Bahama constituency. I've heard the contribution of the member for St. Anne's and also heard the part of the contribution for the member for Centerville and for Fort Charlotte. The Law Reform Commission is one of those important sectors that I believe we all could agree needs to be updated. I think when we look at the 1975 Act, there also, when you look at the wordings of the Act, it does need to be updated. But I do agree with the member for St. Anne's that you cannot oversell something that what you are putting on the record. I mean, what you are putting on the record is changes. There are some minor changes that are being made to the Law Reform Commission and the Law Revision Commission. But you cannot sell it, oversell it in its importance and in what it is going to accomplish in the country. You are doing your job, you are doing what needs to be done, but you are not revolutionizing the Law Reform Commission. What you are doing is making changes, necessary changes, to the law. But there are so many more things. There are so many more things that actually need to occur for this to make sense. The bill has not been simply updated or amended, but you have chosen to redo it. Even though you have repeated, and this is the point that was being made, even though you have repeated a lot of what was already in the bill. So you cannot present this bill and present the section that says that you are going to put in place a new annual report when the act itself already puts that in effect. It already speaks to that. So you can't take credit for something that's already in the law. That's the point that's being made. Speak to the changes that you have made and justify the changes that you have made.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Fort Charlotte.
Mr. Speaker,
what's the point of order?
Mr. Deputy, we are all familiar with what is currently available to the public.
What is the point of order? State what the point of order is.
What is not available to the public, any act not yet brought into force. All laws repeal. In other words, this particular repeal law takes into consideration technology. In other words, an ongoing updating, not having to wait for 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years. It's taking into account technology and areas and items which are not currently available when you go on online. It's not there, and this is very useful.
Thank you, honorable
Very
member.
well.
we on this side, Mr. Deputy, we on this side, we do support the efforts that is being made. We support the changes and support those things that are being made. Mr. Deputy, I believe, though, that successive governments, that there has been, and I believe the member for Centerville, I believe the member for Fort Charlotte would agree with me when I say that there has been challenges with finding good quality draftsmen and women in the Attorney General's office. Now, if you were coming and presenting a plan on how we could recruit additional quality draftsmen, then I support you 100% because that is something that is critically needed. That is something that is critically needed in our system. It is not a talent that can be used outside of government. And as an attorney, I don't know an attorney who comes out of law school saying that I want to be a draftsman. I want to be a quality draftsman. Nevertheless, it is a vitally important skill required for a developing nation. And that is something that is drastically needed for the betterment of our country. The process of drafting and consulting on our laws is critical for the success of our country. Now, when we look, Mr. Deputy, at Section 3, when we look at the changes in the Law Commission Section 3, which changes the number from 5 to 3. Again, knowing the fact that you need additional draftsmen, you need additional persons to assist in terms of this process, I still have not yet heard a compelling reason as to why you would reduce the number from 5 to 3. And I would like to, at the end of my presentation, you don't need to do it now, but I'd like to get an understanding of why you would reduce the number from 5 to 3, knowing that we need more draftsmen, knowing that we need more talent, knowing that we need more things. So you could speak to it in your wrap-up. Section 4, there is, again, no special qualification other than in the Prime Minister's opinion that you are someone who should be appointed to this commission. All of the sections, Mr. Deputy, that I've seen, I've looked at England and their law reform commission. I've looked at Hong Kong. I've looked at Barbados. I've looked at Mauritius. They all have a specific legal requirement. So at the very least, you ought to be a lawyer. And in some instances, it is worded the way that the law is worded, the law is worded today. Not what we are changing it to, but what the law is as it relates to the law today, which is you are a former judge or you are someone who is in legal education. We have former judges or we have existing judges, and we have a law school. We have persons who are qualified legal teachers. So my question again is, why have you decided to move away from the legal requirement and now leaving it open to anyone that the Prime Minister determines has a special skill or experience to deal with these matters, when other countries throughout the world have limited this to lawyers. They have said you have to have, you are, in fact, not just lawyers, but specific lawyers. They've limited it to where there are judges and where there are also legal education professionals. Mr. Deputy, also, it is anticipated that their person, or it is anticipated that their person will also be someone who retires from being a judge and moves directly into the job. We see this section that speaks to a pension and that it is a public officer and so on, which again leads me to the belief that you want to leave this open to public officers and not just former judges, former legal professionals, but you want maybe someone who is a former permanent secretary, maybe someone who is some other public officer to also be into that area as well. It could, if it is a director of legal affairs, that would be wonderful. If it is a former other legal professional who is also a public officer, that would be wonderful as well. But my question is, why take away that legal qualification from being appointed to the commission? I think that's the main question. Members of Parliament also, Mr. Deputy, should also be able to submit projects to the Law Reform Commission. Now, we've seen the list in the Act, but the list does not speak to members of Parliament. Now, if you want to include members of Parliament as a member of the public, then so be it. But I would also recommend that you put in there members of Parliament should also be able to prepare projects, prepare for specific pieces of legislation. And we're not talking about the members of cabinet. We obviously are talking about the backbenchers, and we're talking about members of the opposition. That those persons should also have a part to play, and those persons should also be able to submit those items, those projects to the Law Reform Commission as well. Mr. Deputy, there also should be a designated, or there should be designated officers who are made available to members of Parliament during their presentations. So, for example, and this goes on for both sides, that there are pieces of legislation, detailed pieces of legislation, that members of Parliament who may not be lawyers, members of Parliament who may not know anything when it comes, know much when it comes to different pieces of legislation, the Law Reform Commission should make officers available to all members of Parliament to give specific briefings on those areas of those pieces of legislation. It provides, Mr. Deputy, for a much more quality debate when all of those who are participating in the debate have fully understood the piece of legislation, can articulate their different points of view on the piece of legislation, and can then give their views in terms of those pieces of legislation. It simply requires the members of the Law Reform Commission to be appointed, to be designated, to say, you are going to allow for a presentation on this particular bill, that particular bill, available for members of Parliament to participate in those debates. I agree it could happen, and I agree that it should happen more, and why not put it in the legislation that these things should be made available, and that one of the functions of the Law Reform Commission is to educate not just members of the public, but also educate members of the House of Assembly in their debate. Also, Mr. Deputy, well, again, we don't have a system of a parliamentary draftsman. So this is the closest to a parliamentary draftsman. The only issue is that they will be taking their directives from the Attorney General. So if they've taken their directives from the Attorney General, the question is, are they completely independent? Are they a part of the Parliament, and so on? But outside of that, if we do not have a parliamentary draftsman yet, this is the closest to it. So we should utilize this as a means to be able to educate, to inform the public, but also to be able to educate different members of Parliament on how we debate and how we educate ourselves with these pieces of legislation. Mr. Deputy, there also should be designated officers for members of Parliament to be briefed on the proposed legislation. As I said, the quality of the debate would be better. The consultative process also for things like the marital rape bill, for other pieces of legislation, should go through this process. And as a part of this process, the members of Parliament should also be included in that learning consultative process, also when it comes to the debate. We should be looking at the systems of other countries and pulling from those systems of other countries to see what is better and what we could use, what we don't need to have, or what we already have, to be able to pull from those things. Now, Mr. Deputy, I just want to, as I said, I believe those on this side support this piece of legislation. But there is something that I would also wish to speak about, and that is the proposed increase in water rates for Grand Bahama from the Grand Bahama Utility Company. Mr. Deputy, permit me to raise an issue that may actually need the Law Reform Commission to take a look at, because it does involve the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement, and it does involve legislation that enforces or puts in place the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement. This is a recently occurring issue, and it's still a relevant issue, where the Grand Bahama Utility Company, which is a private company that provides water in Grand Bahama, has made a proposal to increase the water rates in Grand Bahama. Now, what stuck out in my mind was the same time that they made the proposal, the same time that they put forward their proposal, the Grand Bahama Port Authority issued a separate statement under their heading saying they are pleased to review this and review it and their wordings were review it in a fair and transparent way. So, and honestly, it would not have stood out in my mind as being a ridiculous statement if you did not know that the owners of the Port Authority, the shareholders of the Port Authority, are the same owners in the water company. Now, I understood, Mr. Deputy, why this was put in place to begin with. Obviously, it was put in place at a time when Grand Bahama was not developed. It was at a time when Grand Bahama needed to be developed, and you needed to put in place certain incentives to bring in those investors. Grand Bahama has matured. we have gotten to a place where there should be a independent and a separate review body for an increase in water. The process to determine the increase in water rates in Grand Bahama must be fair and must be conducted by an independent body. This day and age, in 2023, it cannot be right for a private company who supplies water to say to an affiliate private company, we're going to review you and we're going to say whether you can increase the rates for us, because in essence it's us being that you are increasing the rate for. It is a conflict of interest. It is a complete conflict of interest. Now, in New Providence and throughout the Bahamas, water is provided and regulated by the Water and Sewage Corporation. However, if there is a rate increase, it would have to be approved by the government, the cabinet, who is accountable to the people. So before water and sewage could increase their rates, the government would have to approve that. And they will have to go to the people, and I would even suggest that if they were going to do it, they would have to come here, the Parliament, to at the very least say to the people, we are going to increase it, this is why we can increase it, this is the rate we can increase it by, and so on and so on. But what is being done in Grand Bahama is not the case. It is not the same situation that is being done. Now, there's also talk about IRCA, but IRCA does not regulate water. IRCA regulates electronic communication and electricity. So it is difficult to say we're going to just put in place a system where IRCA will be able to come in and regulate the water when it comes to dealing with this particular situation. Also, the Grand Bahama Port Authority is not accountable to the people of the Bahamas, but they are accountable to their shareholders. That is something that we cannot overlook. It is something that we cannot just gloss over. Their first obligation, their first legal obligation is to their shareholders, not to the people that they provide water for, which is a problem. The Grand Bahama Port Authority has in its statement committed to a fair and transparent process, which will be impossible when the decision is made by the Grand Bahama Port Authority, whose shareholders are the same as the Grand Bahama Utility Company. Even if the information is true and correct, the process is tainted. Even if what they present to the public is true and correct, the fact that they are making the decision taints the process. This is why, Mr. Deputy, the government must step in and participate in this process. And I accept that the ministry, the Minister of Grand Bahama, has issued a statement basically saying that the process is wrong, or the process is not sufficient, that you want them to go back and look at their process. The government must sit with the Grand Bahama Port Authority to determine a process that is truly fair and independent. And this is where it becomes tricky. How will the government do that? The process will not be fair or transparent if it is left to themselves to make a decision. The government has made a statement, but it must go further. Do not allow the Grand Bahama Port Authority to simply say, this is the way that it has been. When a response, when we first made this case, and I believe the minister made her statement, the response that I heard was, well, this is the way it is. We regulate ourselves. We cannot allow that to be their response. We cannot be satisfied that that is their response. This is also not a fight that the government has to have alone. We are prepared to sit with you and the Port Authority to ensure that there is a fair and transparent process. But we are not prepared to sit quietly and just let it happen. But we are prepared to sit at a table with the government, with the Port Authority, to say to them, we must all come up with a fair, transparent process that the government is satisfied with, the opposition is satisfied with, and most importantly, the people are satisfied with. Who will deal with also, one of the considerations in this is who will deal with all of the issues raised by consumers who had their appliances destroyed because of all of the salty water that was presented during that time. And we all who lived in Grand Bahama, we all suffered with having to bathe and clean and cook with salty water. They made a case out to say they decreased the rate in water, yeah, but we had to suffer through salty water. So we were paying for faulty water. We were paying for salty water. Also, the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the Grand Bahama Utility Company must also seek to partner with other communities throughout Grand Bahama to include more people on their system, which would also lead to more revenue. We believe that there are communities throughout Grand Bahama, some communities who get their water from the ground and pay for their pump and their system. We believe that they should partner with those communities, put in place the infrastructure, put those people on the water company's system so that their revenue could increase and they would be able to pay for all of their expenses. Maybe not pay for all, but also pay for some additional expenses. And thirdly, who is looking at the rate that we in Grand Bahama are paying for water? Is this a fair rate compared to what others are paying in New Providence and what others are paying throughout the Caribbean? We should be able to say that based on what the water rate is in Nassau, based on what the water rate is in Barbados and Jamaica and Florida, that this is a fair rate for water in Grand Bahama. Because what others have reminded me of was years ago, the water rate was a third of what it is today. That's what was presented to me, was that the water rate was significantly lower than it is today. So who is judging this? Who is making that determination? An independent body should be reviewing this and should be looking at this entire situation. So, Mr. Deputy, as we have said, we support what is being done here. We don't believe you should oversell it. You are amending a piece of legislation that was done in 1975. So we understand that, but don't oversell it. And what we are also saying, Mr. Deputy, is that when it comes to the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the Grand Bahama Utility Company, we believe that it is impossible for them to review and provide an assessment on the increase in water rates because of them being owned by the same shareholders. And we believe that the government must step in and must sit with the Port Authority. And we also believe we would also participate in those talks as well, but should sit with the Port Authority to come up with a truly fair and independent mechanism upon which we all could agree with. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Pine Ridge.
The member for East Grand Bahama would have sat in the same seat that I'm sitting in now when he was Minister for Grand Bahama, and would have gone through all of this that we're going through now with the Grand Bahama Port Authority. Pardon me? Well, you were there and you understand the Hospital Creek Agreement and how it works. But I can assure you that this government, from day one, has been addressing these issues with the Grand Bahama Port Authority. And we will be deliberately focused on the regulation and how it works. There is actually a court order right now that deals with, I think, the power company and the Port Authority and its regulation, and our administration is on top of it. So you don't have to worry about that. We've got it. Okay?
Thank you, Honorable Member. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Deputy, I thank the member for Pine Ridge. She's correct. I did sit where she's seated now, and the assurance is not just an assurance to us, but it is an assurance to the people of Grand Bahama that we also support when it comes to ensuring that the people of Grand Bahama feel that they are being looked after and that they are being fought for. So we accept that.
Thank you, Honorable Member.